Hi, my name is Cassidy Tilden, and if you want to learn more about my play in the Talking It Out Festival, check out this video. So I first fell in love with theater when I was really young. The first show I was ever exposed to was Phantom of the Opera. My dad got to see it on Broadway when he was on a business trip, and then the movie came out and he was like, oh, we have to show the kids this, because I was in dance. My brother would put on random show. My brother and I have always been very show heavy people. We like to put on shows for people. And so we would he knew that it would be something that we would be very into. So we watched the movie. Instant obsession between the two of us. We would charge admission for our parents to come and watch us perform, but it was really just we would make paper tickets to give them, and my brother would pretend to play the organ in his phantom mask while I did ballet behind him. And it just kind of spun forward from there. We would watch little musicals every now and again. We would go see shows at our local theater. In middle school, I decided that I wanted to try out for some shows because a friend of mine in the 6th grade was in a show, and I went to see him, and I was like, hey, I could do that too. So in middle school, I decided to do it. And my mom asked me, she was like, will you give your brother permission to join doing theater with you, even though I made you wait until middle school? And I said, yeah, sure. So my brother and I were in our first show together when I was in the 7th grade, and he was in 3rd. So, which was a musical called Pinkalicious. And it's a show that lives in our hearts forever, and we make jokes about it all the time because it's a very stereotypical kids show based off of a kid's book. But it just really spun our love for it further, and we both finally found that outlet of being able to put that energy in where we wanted to put it in, because we are always very rambunctious to begin with. I personally have always been writing since I was young. I want to say in the 3rd grade is when I really started to write stories, because I was able to function putting together sentences and things like that. In the 5th grade, I wrote one of my favorite stories that everyone else in my class laughed at, but I thought it was funny and thought it was good and well written. But I kept writing and doing all those basic grade school, middle school, into high school type of writing things. And at that age, it was a lot of fiction, because a lot of what I was writing would reflect what I was reading, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because you learn how to create things initially through what it is that you are ingesting. So I have stories that I wrote in middle school and high school that bear very strong resemblances to Twilight and Harry Potter before I could find my own voice and figure out my own stories from there. And then in college, my freshman year of university, we did a student-written production, and it was really cool, and I got to see the process from the writer's side and how they worked with the directors and everything like that. And I knew that I wanted to write as my profession. I knew that that's what I wanted it to be. And it wasn't until then that I realized, hey, I've always loved writing, and I've always loved doing theater. Plays don't just exist out of nowhere. They have to come from something. Why have I never thought of putting those two things together? And a friend of mine asked me to write a 10-minute play for his directing scene, and then it just kind of started to pinwheel from there. I started writing 10-minute plays. I started writing one acts. I eventually made my way down to doing a full-length play, which my first ever full-length play that I wrote was a farce, which is a joke in itself, because why would you choose a farce to be your first full-length play to write? That's taking on a lot. But thanks to everyone in college to help push me forwards and figure out what works, what doesn't work, and combine that with the love that I started in middle school and before that for theater. I finally figured out that what it is that I want to do with writing, and to be able to put that in front of an audience and feel the energy in the room and feel what everyone is feeling. There's just something special about theater, of being able to experience something all together and feel the emotion in the room and share that emotion with the actors and everything like that. And I just miss theater so much right now. I would love to sit in a theater and just experience a moment with 100 strangers right now. I miss it a whole lot. So the playwriting format is it's very different. And I'm very thankful that I started doing plays when I did, because I think that one of the big humps that a lot of my classmates struggled with in like high school, when in literature classes you had to read plays for class, that was the biggest thing that everyone struggled to get over, is the fact that you have to imagine everything yourself, and that you don't have that full-on description there. And the analytical side of things is pulled directly from what's on the page, and not from, why are the blue curtains blue? Because they're just blue. They don't mean anything else other than they're blue. So you have to like pull the meaning from the words exactly. And within that, I always like to play with the line, I always pay my taxes. No matter how you say that line, depending on where you emphasize certain things, changes the meaning of the line. I always pay my taxes. I always pay my taxes. I always pay my taxes. You know, like every time you say it, it means something different. So that in and of itself allows for such room to play. And there's something experimental about that. And through my writing processes that I've like come to learn with like pulling people in to read things, I could be writing something and take it one direction, but the person reading it could mean it something, like could take it as meaning something completely different. And that pinwheels into, okay, so let's look at it from this character's perspective, or let's look at it from this character's perspective, which really makes the text even more deep than what it could be, because theater has always been a collaborative art. And it should be a collaborative art, even from the playwright's like first like moment of conception, because other people are always going to come in and help out developing that piece. So bringing people in, trusted people, obviously is nicer than like having like a random person come over and read it, because then you like understand where that person is and how they might like understand things. But being able to be more experimental with that versus like, just because like reading a book is comforting and everything like that, and it allows you, it does paint a picture, but like the way that plays are written allows for so much room for your own form of creativity. And I think that when I was in school, like that's where I definitely like reaffirmed the fact that I loved theater and that I would potentially in the future want to write plays, because it does allow for even more creativity than in the confines of writing for fiction. Because while you have to build that world when you're writing fiction and you have to describe all these things, just because while I'm writing about this character who might be tall and have brown hair and have brown eyes does not mean that the director or casting person is like, oh no, this other person would be perfect for the role. And then you see them on stage, because like that's not something that you should have to worry about anyway when you're writing something, because whoever fulfills that piece and like the way that they present themselves, and then the costumer comes in and says this piece will allow them to move on stage better, the color will represent XYZ later in the script, like all of those things combined allows for such a much more beautiful connected piece, rather than one person writing down saying like, it was windy outside, she had on a blue sweater and her hair flew in the wind. You know, I don't know, there's just something about that that makes it even more creative. And every time you see it, depending on who's directing it or who's doing what, it's going to be different, which allows for a different experience every time, which allows for it to be new every time. You could read the same book 3 times and get something new out of it, but at the end of the day, nothing has changed in that book. What's changed on stage depends on the actor, depends on the costumer, depends on the director, depends on the lighting designer, the set designer, all those things. So you could have a completely different experience every time you see it. My process for writing, I feel like everyone has a very different process. Mine never really finds like a regular like pattern. If I'm writing a 10-minute play, it's usually I have the idea, I sit down and I write it in about 30 minutes and that's it. That's why I have at least like in my sake, a surplus of 10-minute plays, because I can sit down, crunch it out, and it's done. And then I can set it to the side. I'll go through and edit it another set, because like it needed that moment. It had the moment, moving on. I don't like writing one acts. I've tried writing one acts. There's something about one acts that I just can't wrap my head around. They're not for me. 10-minute plays are great because you can get the idea across, get it done, and it's out of there. Full-length plays, you can take the time that you need to build it up, have all those moments in there. one acts are those weird like things right in the middle, and I can't seem to cut down either to like make it like punch it to that point that it needs to be at. So I tend to stay away from one acts because I haven't figured them out yet. I still try, but they haven't been for me. For my full length plays, I typically, for what I've done recently, is I always use those as my pieces to challenge myself. So because my 10-minute plays, I'm able to crank out pretty quickly, have a concept and set it to the side. I will think of something that, like, if I'm looking for something new to write or work on, I'll either think of a character or a genre or a concept that I think might be a little bit more of a challenge, so that way I'm keeping myself on my toes, I'm learning as I'm going, and I'm doing all these other things. So when I wrote my first show, my first full-length play, which is a farce called Green Bean Casserole, I was thinking like, okay, I need to write a full-length play. I need to try this out for myself. What's a concept, like what's a type of play that I personally enjoy as an actor and an audience member? A farce. I'm oftentimes like put myself in the role of, I'm always cast as a comedic relief person, because I find that I can easily find the joke. I know how to land it. I can do all those things. So as an actor, I really like farces because that's a time to like showcase who I am as an actor and like really deliver it. However, as a female comedic actor, it's very difficult to find a farce where there's a main character who is a female and isn't used as like a sexual object or a plot device or anything like that. Like all the classics that exist for farces, it's always two men. There's notable women who are plot devices. One of them gets like stripped on stage at some point from their maid costume to whatever. Like those are very stereotypical tropes that you see in those things. So it's like, this is the problem that I see for comedic women. So I decided to write a farce for two lead women where they are the main characters. They are not plot devices. They are not sexual objects. Like they are the ones who are running the show. And I realized about 2 drafts in how difficult farces are, because there's constantly everything has to be going like, who knows what, who's coming in where, when do you have to shut things down, who knows the jokes, who doesn't, like who's the comedic relief for the comedy and all those other things. So that draft is probably as close as it can be to being finished. I've been working on that one for about 4.5 years now. Which to me is insane that I never thought that I would have to spend that long on a piece of writing. But the fact that I still come back to it and find ways to improve it based off of who I see reading it and things like that like I'm able to develop and look into more is incredible to me. But I use that one as a challenge. Another one that I'm working on that I'm about 4 drafts in on, which is a full length called Ashes to Ashes, is a more personal piece. And it's really hard for me to write personally about myself or about any history that I have, because it's really injecting me more into the piece and it is exposing myself to the world in a way that I've never really done before. So while it's not necessarily me, it is a more personal story that while there are people who know generally about what happened, it is still very different to like put yourself out there on the stage. When I had my first reading for it, which was with a group of people who I am very personally close to and I trust with my whole heart and soul, because I wasn't about to have people who I don't know very well read this piece, I still like my heart rate went through the roof and I was nervous. I was sweating the whole time and I had never experienced that before, not even with Green Beans, which was my first ever full length play. And there's always some kind of nerves when you're showcasing your work to the world because a piece of you is always with it. There's always some kind of piece of you, some residue that exists within the script. And there's also that fear of judgment that does exist. Like no matter how good you feel about the piece, there's always somebody out there who you're like, oh, this person's totally not going to like it. And you're going to have to live with that or try to get over it, which I've gotten better at, but it's still there. And, but like with this piece specifically, because it is so truly a true story, it was still even more difficult. And so that's why I needed to have that close group of friends. And they still they enjoyed it. They gave me feedback in a really beneficial way and things like that of the things that I noticed or didn't notice. And which is really nice. And that one's probably going to be in development a little bit while longer, just because of the fact that it is as personal as it is. But like I've really, like, I try to like focus on like things that I haven't tried before. Like I'm doing, oh goodness, I can never remember what the term of it is. There's a form of, this makes me sound like I'm not knowledgeable, but I promise I am. I can't I can't remember the term for it, but like the form of play where there's several scenes that take place over a period of time, but it's all set in one location. And like you come back the next week and things have changed. Working on that one to play around with that because it's a very different format from what I'm used to. Playing around with different forms of like getting across like stage directions. Like that's kind of like how I pick about what it is that I do. I always find a way to worm my way back to comedy because that's my comfort zone. So I can never do anything that's 100% tragic in any way, shape, or form because the world can't exist without you being able to laugh at yourself anyway. So you're gonna have to laugh at some point. So even if I wanted to do a tragedy, it's not a tragedy, it's a dark comedy because I'm laughing all the time. So I expect people who watch things that I write to be laughing quite a bit along the way as well. So comedy is just my like always my go-to, but like I always try to like find ways to challenge myself in pushing forward and finding new ways because like there's not really to go back to originally what I was talking about. Like I don't really have like a regular format that I go back to. It's just me always finding ways to challenge myself and pushing forward from there. So more of the community should be represented in theater just because I mean the theater is the reflection of society itself. And we don't look around and like, I am obviously a woman sitting here and I'm not another man. Like if you look on stage and like see like a Shakespeare play, which is predominantly male, like that's not a accurate reflection of like what you see in your community day by day. Like you see a variety of colors, you see a variety of genders, you see a variety of sexual orientation, and all those people deserve to be represented because it is a reflection of society itself. I had a friend who actually sent me a text message the other day with an inspiration for a character because she said, I have not seen a character like this represented in any form of media, any form of theater ever. I challenge you to write something with a main character based like this. And I said, absolutely. So that one is weighing on the back of my mind because it would be a challenge. Like I said previously, I like to challenge myself. So this one would be a challenge for sure. And then within that, you also have to make sure, like, sure, I could sit here and say, I want to write a piece with a Latina woman as my lead. However, I, as a white woman, need to make sure that I do justice to that character and not just say she has to be a Latina woman. I am going to reach out to my friends who are Latina women to make sure that I am doing justice to this character and I'm not just writing a stereotype. I want to make sure that that character is written perfectly and without like flaw in that area because I can't just say, oh, this is a stereotype of this person because that's incredibly wrong. So yes, we need to have theater that is a reflection of our society, and it's so important to have that. However, we have to do justice to it, and we can't just write it based off of a stereotype. So that's why it's easier for me to write about just in general women as leads because I have the experience of being a woman as a lead. If I'm going to go and write a show that includes anyone of a sexual orientation that I am not, anyone who is a race that I am not, I need to make sure that I am doing justice by them and doing my accurate research, speaking to someone who has had that experience, making sure that they are a part of my playwriting experience, inviting them to readings, making sure that that character is being done justice to, because I don't want to sit down and have that piece go out there and have them like have that reflection on me then as a playwright or on a reflection of that part of the society, because yes, society needs to be represented, but it also needs to be represented accurately, and it needs to be represented in a tasteful manner as well. So if I'm remembering correctly, because I've submitted work, when you're a playwright, you just kind of submit work everywhere, right? Just in hopes that maybe you'll get your name out there. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe it was on one of my regular sites that I check monthly. And it really fit my forms that I do for my 10-minute plays. My 10-minute plays typically take one of two different forms. One of them is a comedy area that deals with like an association with like death in a funny way, because I have a really weird relationship with death. I have lots of history there that we could get into, but we're not gonna right now. Or it's like dealing with some kind of mental illness in any way, because it was something that I struggled with a lot in college, is dealing with depression, anxiety, overworking myself, things like that are all like very prominent, and they continue to like scar over or like reemerge in different ways. And so seeing this fit my work perfectly, and it felt like I could definitely blend in with those things and like highlight certain things. So the piece that was selected, Amygdala, is about having an anxiety attack and how to deal with that in that moment. And typically when I write about things like that are like mental illness based, I try to like personify it and put it in a different way. Because like if you're having an anxiety attack, you could be experiencing it in different ways. You could be sitting in class, you could be at work doing whatever, you could be sitting at home by yourself and a little thought enters your brain and you're all of a sudden like done for. And that's like, you could be looking at someone and they could be having an anxiety attack and you could not know. You could be looking at them and you could totally know. So being able to personify that with like speaking to that part of your brain that you're dealing with really helps me understand it a little bit more and rationalize it for when I'm going through things like that. Because if I can rationalize it through pumping out words and like how I would go through it that way in a show form, then I know that there's someone else out there who could also like benefit from understanding that from that perspective as well. Because that's typically how I'm able to understand things more, is by rationalizing it through talking about it, writing about it, things like that. So by being able to sit down and be like, this is me rationalizing me having an anxiety attack. Typically, it is me in my own brain shouting at myself anyway. So if I could have a person there to actually shout at, then other people might understand that a little bit better and like vibe with that too. It's about a character who is having an anxiety attack, kind of comes out of nowhere. The brain is who he is talking to. Very creative name there. The name is Brian. I thought it was hilarious because if you switch the I and A, it spells brain. Very creative on my end. But also giving a name to whoever it is that you're talking to definitely helps personify that even more and give it even more purpose. Because like by giving something a name gives it weight. So there's some weight to it and being able to like deal with that. So it's the process of rationalizing things that come through. There are things that don't matter that they have to rationalize. There are things that do matter that they have to rationalize. And the brain is just like throwing it at them one at a time. And then it's a matter of, do I sit here and do I take it and work out the anxiety attack? Or do I go ahead and take this medication that I really don't want to take to help dumb it down and have to deal with it later? So I have not met the actors at all. I know that there have been opportunities to sit in on the rehearsal process. However, due to my work schedule, I have not been able to sit in and actually get to meet them yet at all. So when I get to watch it, it's going to be like everyone else watching it all together, of like having that new experience and getting to see it with new people like experiencing it too at the same time. And honestly, that's kind of refreshing. And I've had that experience a couple of other times where I haven't sat in on the rehearsal process and I haven't really known the actors. And sometimes I think that's really nice and it's refreshing to bring that new perspective, and it really breathes some fresh air into it. Because there are times when I've worked with actors who I personally know and I've gotten to know, and it'll have a different effect versus if I don't know them at all. And I'm able to like, because like if I know them, sometimes I end up putting their own personalities into the characters and I let that end up overwhelming who the character is. Whereas if I don't know the actors, I really get to see the character as the character themselves. You know, like, because like if you know someone, you're like, oh, this person's usually like this. And so adding that additional like sprinkle personality that character might not necessarily have, versus someone fresh coming onto the scene who doesn't like, who you know nothing about, and you really get to like experience that with them and they are that character in that moment, I think brings something different to the page. So I'm very excited to see these actors perform this piece and like get to experience it with them in the moment. I just hope that the audience is able to find something that resonates with them with this piece. I think that more so, I don't know if it's like, I wouldn't say that it's like become a recent thing that people have like experienced anxiety or anything. I think that it's more so that people are being less afraid of like talking about it, which I think is a good thing, and that we should be able to open up and talk about these things. And for people to like, I hope that there's some kind of resonation there so that people know that they're not alone when they're dealing with this stuff. There are other people out there who also have the same experience. Your brain might tell you really dumb things to stress out about, and that's okay because other people are stressing about dumb things too. And it's just like the human experience of like, sure, stress sucks, but you're not alone, and you're gonna find a way to deal with it eventually, and hopefully you won't be alone when you are dealing with it. So hopefully things like that resonate with them, because like my biggest thing is that like even though things are like stressful at times and sometimes it feels like you can't get through that anxiety attack, there are other people who are dealing with it too. And there's some comfort in that, knowing that you are not alone in going through things like that. And that has also been my mantra for all of 2020 with all the terrible things that have been going on, is that at least we are all not alone in dealing with everything. So I think my biggest thing with like festivals like this is like just exposure to other people's work and other people's like thought processes of things. Because it wasn't until about last year or so that I actually was able to first be exposed to the playwriting world with the other playwrights that exist in it. I'd been very closed off and in my own bubble, and partially because I was a little baby playwright. I still am a little baby playwright, figuring out who they are and what it is that where they exist in the world of playwrights. I knew very basic information, and I was able to get to go to a conference and meet a whole bunch of playwrights and see all their work and things like that, and learn about other things that people are creating. And I think that the biggest thing about being able to be a part of this or learning about festivals that exist like this are being able to form some kind of a connection with a playwright, not even if I don't get to like personally meet them or speak to them. Every person's play, like I said previously, has a little bit of them in it. So I get to learn a little bit more about that playwright simply by watching their play, hearing the words that they've written, and then finding other, and like through that, I'll get to find work that I enjoy, I'll get to go to like New Play Exchange or something, assuming that they're on New Play Exchange, and be like, I liked this playwright's work a whole lot. I'm going to go to their profile, see what other work they have, and then expose myself more and more to other playwrights' work, because I think that it's very important as a playwright to expose yourself to other work that exists out there and know what's out there, and know who you get to collaborate with and learn more about through these things. Because there are a lot of playwrights out there, and it's very difficult to like learn about where they exist and what pieces they have created and things like that. So this is a really great opportunity to get to learn more about those playwrights and the work that they create, like resonate with the things that they've been dealing with, and see if there is other work out there to learn more about and read and expose myself to. Events like this are super important because like I said previously, it's exposure to these things, and it's so much easier to find some form of relation and connection to these things through like the exposure of having things on stage. Like while this won't be in a theater and you won't get to experience it with everyone else, you can imagine, you can like, if you've been in a theater before, you can feel like what that energy would be in the space of experiencing something that's super anxietous, things that somebody who is experiencing PTSD, depression, anything like that. Like there is a level of emotion that exists in a room when that's going on, and to have that connection with a stranger 100 feet away or right next to you even is incredible, and not like anything else that you could experience anywhere else that is specifically like just for a theater. And while once again we won't get to have the in-theater experience for this, the fact that it should still continue to exist and like be brought forth in a theater will have a completely different set of emotions versus watching a television show about it, you know? people must watch the Talking Out Loud festival because of the mental health awareness that exists out there. Like I had mentioned previously, it is becoming more and more important to talk about mental illness, and it's becoming more and more prominent to do it. So sometimes the best way to experience it is through like a play where it's not like you're not actually sitting there being like, yeah, I have mental illness, but instead you're watching other people, characters that exist, expose it. Because like sometimes it's very difficult for people to talk about it and like say, hey, this thing is affecting me. But if you're seeing somebody else showcase that on stage through a reading, whatever, it's much easier to like connect with that character. It's like watching TV and say, I resonate with that character on TV and things like that. Like being able to resonate with the words on the page and like being able to identify like, hey, I'm like this, hey, I'm like that, and just being able to like make mental illness like more prominent, to like know that you're not alone and know like how to help people who might need help for those things. And because you aren't alone, and mental illness, while it does suck quite a bit, there are solutions out there, and there are other people who are going through it pretty hard with you. And I feel like I've said it quite a bit, that you're not alone, and that has some form of comfort in it, even if it's not exactly what anyone wants to hear at the time. To me, it has been the most comforting thing to think about whenever I am going through those things. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to be able to experience at least plays in some type of way. I think that through the pandemic and us having to do shows in this manner has also exposed a lot of ways that theater can exist beyond the stage, which I think is very important, as well as being in a theater and experiencing it, but like the exposure that you can have to other work via doing this. In addition to that, I think the pandemic has taught us that having some kind of access to shows virtually is of use, like with the when Hamilton came out on Disney Plus at the beginning of the pandemic, and how people went nuts for it, and then they went nuts over Newsies and nuts over literally anything that was digitally like on a streaming service. I think that having theater available for accessibility that's not just in like physically in the theater is also very important, if not for just sitting down and recreationally watching it, but also for an educational standpoint, to be able to bring that into a classroom or something, to have students exposed to that and then analyze it from that perspective is also very important. So while I do miss theater in my heart and soul, and can't wait for the next moment that I can sit in a chair and experience everything with 1,000 strangers, I also think it's important to find ways to like maintain the things that we've been doing through the pandemic with theater, and incorporating that into how theater will exist in the future. My name is Cassidy Tilden, and if you enjoyed this, make sure you check out the Talking It Out Festival by going to the website and getting a ticket and checking it out.